This podcast is an affiliate of BCW Supplies. The next time you need to restock on comic book bags, boards, boxes, and more, be sure to use promo code FSP to save 10% on your order. That's FSP for Flat Squirrel Productions. It helps support the show too. Thank you. My love of the TV series Smallville is well documented, and there's one Smallville podcast that's always at the top of my queue. Always Hold On to Smallville, hosted by our pal, Zach Moore. Zach and his guests bring great insight, passion, and humor to each and every episode. And the podcast will continue with more great Smallville and Superman talk even after their series coverage concludes. Listen wherever you get podcasts, and keep an eye out for the other shows under the Always Hold On to banner, including Arrow, Star Wars, and more. Welcome to Digging for Kryptonite, a Superman fan journey. I'm your host, Anthony Desiato. Joining me to discuss Superman, Batman, Public Enemies in comics and animation is the host of Cartridges with Care, returning guest, Jeremy Frutkin. Welcome back.
Anthony, I feel like we've been podcasting together for a few years now, and our relationship, I think, is ready for the next level, where I'm ready to tell you that if, God forbid, you ever got shot with a piece of kryptonite, I would help you walk underneath the sewers in a graveyard to get you to safety. Okay? I want you to know that. It's from me to you.
I feel that, I believe it, and I appreciate it. So thank you very much.
Thank you. It's good to be back, pal.
This is a banger of a story. I'm just going to come right out and say that. This is one that's been a favorite of mine for a long time. It's one that I would recommend and have recommended without reservation to readers, whether they're newer to DC or comics altogether, or they're more experienced, but for whatever reason, they never got around to this particular story. I feel like it's been a little while since I asked you for stories that you had an attachment to that you'd be interested to come on and talk about. And when I did, this was one of the stories that I think was near the top of that list. So, well, let me toss it to you first. What is it about this that earned it that spot?
So it's the time in which it's set, first and foremost. You know, we can talk about the early 2000s of it all and all that good stuff. But one of the things that struck me the most is that I had been reading DC Comics for a while, but also, as is well documented on Digging for Kryptonite, go check out the archive episodes and all of our talk about all things with the Timverse and everything Justice League and Justice League Unlimited. This story of Public Enemies is the perfect companion piece in so many ways to everything I love about Justice League Unlimited, Justice League, this story, and even, we'll get to this, but even the film adaptation that, you know, we watched could have very easily been a two-part episode to Justice League or Justice League Unlimited, not even counting the same voice cast returning. Yes, that's wonderful. But I mean that as an utmost compliment and praise. Anybody who's listened to us talked about that knows that. You know, a lot of times, whether it's comics or one of my other passions, video games, the question is like, you know, what would you show to somebody who's never read a Batman, Superman comic before? What video game would you show somebody who's never played this type of video game before? This is one of those Mount Rushmore stories where I think you could show somebody who's never read a comic book before, and I think they would have a blast and also start understanding the depth that not only the two central characters of Batman and Superman have, but the entire DC universe as well. You get so many characters brought in with just enough spice to kind of be, who's this Captain Atom fellow? Who's this Captain Marvel, now Shazam, that was actually able to defeat Batman? Like, that's unbelievable. How often do you see that? And that's, I think, what makes this story so special.
Well said. Yeah, there's definitely an accessibility to this. We always talk about Jeff Loeb's Hush as this great tour through the Batman family and the Batman Rogues Gallery. And I was thinking about it. I feel like in a similar way, Superman, Batman, Public Enemies serves as a bit of a tour of the wider DC universe. You get these incredibly high, but also very personal stakes and a really great look at the dynamic between Batman and Superman. So there really is a lot to offer. And yeah, that's why it has been, and I think remains kind of a go-to recommendation. So Public Enemies, written by Jeff Loeb, illustrated by Ed McGuinness. They were our creative team on the Superman title for a period of time, which we've very recently covered again on the podcast. And they left the Superman title to launch Superman Batman. The first issue came out in August 2003. It was a 6-part storyline. It was later adapted into a 2009 animated film written by Stan Berkowitz, directed by Sam Liu. The stories track very closely, although there are a number of key points of departure, and we'll talk about both versions of the story. This is one of those ones I imagine I don't need to do a ton in terms of plot setup. I feel like this is one that people are probably pretty generally familiar with, but the long and short of it is that President Luthor blames Superman for a Kryptonite asteroid that is heading towards Earth and puts a $1 billion bounty on his head. And Superman and Batman
put the pinky up like Dr. Evil.
Yes.
Says 1 billion, right? Yeah.
So Superman and Batman team up to clear his name, take down President Luthor, and stop the asteroid. And you go back to like you were saying, the period of time. So 2003, a decade into my Superman fan journey at that point. And I think there were a few things going on with this when this came out. So number one, this, like I said, was the creative team that had been working on the Superman title, and they came over here. Unlike the other team-up books with these two characters that we would get in the years since this title, this was the only one that was called Superman Batman, right? In the years since, we've gotten a number of Batman Superman titles. And it might not seem like a huge distinction, but the fact that Superman got top billing said something. And the fact that it was the creative team from Superman. And when we look at Jeff Loeb's entire run on the series, he did 4 arcs. And we actually talked about them as a whole years ago now. Ken Marion joined me. We did a whole episode on it. Now, of course, we're zeroing in on Public Enemies, but we have talked about all of the arcs. But all of the arcs, we're dealing with President Lex, Supergirl in the next arc, then the Legion of Supervillains, and then ultimately Mxyzptlk and Joker's in the mix as well in that with the Vengeance arc and Darkseid. There's a lot going on in that last one. Sure. But I would say, by and large, the arcs are generally fairly Superman-centric. So all to say that then and now, I really looked at this as an extension of and an addition to the Superman franchise. And this was a big book. I mean, big stuff happened here. This is where they took down President Lex, and then we get Kara Zor-El reintroduced to the DC universe in the next arc. Big happenings in the DC universe occurred here. And so that, I think, kind of just as a preliminary matter, really kind of elevated this book for me.
Yeah, no, and you also kind of already hit the nail on the head here too, right? Because there's huge stakes on a continuity and a then modern level, right, for the whole DC universe, but it's also the personal stakes as well too, which is great, right? Where you really kind of get that inner monologue that's so wonderful throughout this, that really shows, the old chestnut of, the more we're different, the more we are the same, right? You see them from two opposite ends of a coin, but also very, very similar. And I like that because I think in a broad stroke, it's always very easy to paint Batman and Superman as just like, Batman moody, Superman happy, or, this shows, I like that they spent so much more time highlighting their similarities, I think, than differences. And I think that also went a long way for the story.
Yeah, we'll talk more about the dueling narrations. I, too, am a fan. Not everybody is, and we have a couple of other perspectives that that I'll share on that. But no, I am a fan. But the other things that kind of came to mind was, one of them was that at this point in time in 2003, I was aware in an academic sense that there had been a World's Finest title in pre-crisis continuity, a monthly adventure where Superman and Batman teamed up. But like I said, more in an academic sense. I had never read it or even really read much about it. I don't think I knew how extensive the World's Finest history and tradition was in the larger DC universe.
You weren't firing the Infinite app up in 2003?
I was not. And I mean, I'm sure I saw the old archive editions at our local comic shop, which I also want to mention our comic shop as well.
There you go.
But so it was one of those things where I had this larger sense of World's Finest, but it wasn't anything that I had really experienced. And so when anything I kind of knew of Superman and Batman working together, it was in the context of JLA, which of course is a larger team book, or guest appearances in each other's books, or probably most significantly, the World's Finest television arc from the DCAU, and then of course the Justice League animated series. But this was the first time where I was plunged into this monthly team up book with the two of them as the co-leads. So this really was like my introduction to the concept of the world's finest in a really big way. And then, like I said, I was mentioning our local comic shop, the late great Alternate Realities. This was the second summer that I was working at the shop. This was right before my junior year of high school, and that just remains a very special time. And I remember that summer, the first issue came out August 2002. Like I remember working there on that Wednesday as we were breaking down the shipment. So now that's kind of, I guess, what was going on in my life and fandom that really made this resonate with me so much. But then and now, I think what really resonates story-wise for me, really this look at the dynamic between the characters, so much of which comes through the narration. But the fact that the story takes these two icons, these two pillars of the DC universe, two sides of the same coin, and makes them these badass underdogs.
Yep.
Fighting the villains and the heroes of the DC universe. And they just have each other in the trenches. And it's just...
It's a beautiful thing, man.
Yeah, it's really, really fantastic. So that probably more than anything is what continues to make this a favorite of mine. Now, there's a big picture question that I've been wrestling with that I hope maybe I'll sort out by the end of this episode. And I put the call out to our patrons and I got some submissions and I'll share those. And I want to pose this question to you. We didn't talk about this ahead of time, so I'll lay it out and let it marinate. I want to get your take on this.
I'm ready.
So historically, I never really loved the notion that the post-crisis evil businessman Lex dons the green warsuit and physically engages Superman in combat at the climax of the story. Overall, I've gotten past that. And it was actually one of our other guests, Scott Honig, I'll give him credit for this, who I think kind of helped me with that, because the argument that he made in one of our prior discussions essentially was like, not that there was nowhere else for Lex to go, but kind of, we have followed the evil businessman Lex essentially as far as we can go. Like the character has achieved with the presidency, the apex of power, authority, influence. Well, where do you go from there? And so we have this turn, we have this other avenue to explore with the character. And of course, it's this huge callback to pre-crisis continuity when he was the mad scientist and he was in the battle suit and all of that. And when we talked about that really smoothed over a lot for me. And for the most part, I've been cool with that. And when we talked about Lex generally, this was one of the periods that we zeroed in on, and we see in this time a bit of those pre-crisis elements coming back in, and we see more of the scientific side of him and things like that. So, there are kind of a few things going on here, but overall I'm okay with it. But now a new problem has emerged, Jeremy.
It always does, buddy. There's always a new problem.
I was saying to myself, well, we could just keep doing this podcast forever because it's an ever evolving process. One problem is solved.
What if I told you that I hope we do? What if a cliched Batman saying goes, I think we're destined to do this forever.
All right. So but here's the problem that came up for me, because we just went through the Loeb Kelly era of the super titles. Mm-hmm. And I hope people enjoy those episodes, and I don't want to rehash it too much. But when we talked about President Lex in particular, the President Lex development, and then Our Worlds at War, which featured President Lex pretty heavily as he guided Earth through that intergalactic conflict. And what I kept coming back to was that, all things considered, Lex was a surprisingly restrained, competent president. I'm not painting him as a saint, but when you look at the campaign, he built his whole campaign on the slogan of truth, justice, and the American way. So he really co-opted that traditional Superman motto. But he was running as part of the Tomorrow Party, and the whole platform was the sharing of the Brainiac 13 technology with the rest of the country. It was all built on leveraging this technology, sharing it, progress, advancement, bringing people in. There wasn't any anti-alien, anti-superhuman rhetoric. The opposite, in fact. And so there were numerous moments during the campaign and during Our Worlds at War as well, where I felt like the stories really reversed your expectations of what you would think Lex would do in that sort of situation. And then we get here, and we get to Public Enemies, and the putting of the bounty on Superman's head, injecting himself with this cocktail of liquid kryptonite and Bane venom, jumping in that warsuit. He's truly unhinged. Yeah. Deranged by the end of this story. And so the question that I posed to our patrons, the question that I'll pose to you, and the one that I'm trying to sort out for myself, Is there any way in which we can say this was a natural progression? Or was it a very abrupt shift that we can't totally reconcile with the stories that preceded it?
Well, this is good because I've already have a lot of thoughts on this. Do you want to do this now or you want me to marinate?
No, if you're ready to go for it.
Right. Well, the first immediate thought that comes to my head is like, well, wanted to be. You think of Lex Luthor. One of the things you think of is ego, right? You think that first he had to keep it together and stay, more or less restraint, as you said, to become president. Then I think his ego needed to also say, not for necessarily the good of the planet or the good of the country, but his ego must know, he's a very smart man, as is well documented, that some people at least are still going to think I'm just a crazed megalomaniac. So let me actually show that I am competent and I am a good president, right? And I think once he was able to do all of that, and it's like, okay, I succeeded, I did everything. Well, what is there else to do? There's two different schools of thoughts I'm also ponking around in my head right now on the fly. Is that, okay, he was able to, relax a little bit. And when he starts relaxing and let those things down, the crazies come out. Or it's also possible that he was legitimately deep down on some level scared and afraid of what to do with this Kryptonite asteroid coming, right? And also that Kryptonite being such a trigger for him as well, too, being related to Superman. Maybe that was if it was a regular asteroid, would he have acted the same way? No, it's Kryptonite, it's Kryptonite, it's Superman. Superman's always ruining everything for me. And maybe that gave him a little bit of the old school Lex that we know is always there underneath on some level.
Yeah, no, I appreciate those thoughts. Yeah, I mean, like I said, I don't know totally where I land on this. I think analytically, I can't shake the feeling that this felt like a pretty abrupt, hard turn after what we had seen.
Well, everything I just did is I'm painting in the blanks, and nowhere did they ever tell us any of that. No, but that's me being devil's advocate a little bit there. So yes, I'm with you on that being abrupt.
No, but that's the thing. But then I think in my heart, and especially given my affinity for the Loeb Kelly era of the titles. Mm-hmm. And look, there was no way we were going to go through the entire Loeb Kelly era again and not spend some time on Superman, Batman, Public Enemies. Because I really do look at this as, I don't know if that epilogue is even the right word to the Loeb Kelly era, but I feel like a look at that run of comics is incomplete if you don't include this, especially given the fact that it resolves the President Luthor storyline. So we had to circle back to this.
What do you think was more abrupt? Like him putting this suit on and finally being, kind of losing it, or just planting a fat one on Amanda Waller? What do you think out of those two was the most abrupt and surprising? Because even reading that again, I was like, oh man, that's still surprising even now. Talk about him being, out of pocket and just acting on emotion.
And what's funny, in the adaptation, you would think maybe that was something that could have been left on the cutting room floor.
I was sweating. As soon as I saw them alone together, I was like, oh, this is the part that they're sticking to. Interesting.
Yeah.
They were like, no, this has to stay. That's what they said.
Yeah, that rather curious.
The kiss heard around the world.
Yeah. And I went back again through the stories after our Worlds at War and before Public Enemies, trying to be as generous as I could be. Like, is there something in there that really kind of would account for this? And there's really not much. The one thing that I will cite, and maybe this is being a little generous, but I'm going to cite this. We've talked about this in prior episodes. Towards the end of Loeb and McGinnis's run on the Superman title, Lex learned that Clark is Superman. Mm-hmm. Pretty shortly thereafter, at the conclusion of the Ending Battle crossover storyline, Manchester Black erased Lex's memory of that. Shortly after that, this is now kind of post-Action Comics 800 territory, pretty shortly before Public Enemies. So they're pretty close in time. There was a storyline by Joe Kelly called The Harvest, and it was the conclusion of his work with the General Zod of Pakistan. A lot of business over there that we can leave there. But in that storyline, President Lex, and Superman are forced to work together. And in that storyline, Lex, I would say, is more kind of outwardly hostile towards Superman than we'd seen before. And the source of that hostility in that storyline is the fact that Lex knows his memory was altered. He knows that he used to know who Superman really was. He just can't remember. It's not like his memory of the entire thing was just wiped. Like, he knows his mind was tampered with. and he thinks Superman is responsible. Now, there is nothing between The Harvest and Public Enemies where there's any sort of explicit line drawn that maybe that is driving Lex a little crazy or pushing him over the edge. But if we do look at those stories, which, like I said, are pretty close in time together, maybe that is part of what is fueling this.
And we're doing a lot of painting outside the lines here and a lot of heavy lifting, you know? But yeah, I mean, I think that's a logical summation. I would be curious to see, you know, why. Was it just they were like, okay, this needs to be the big one? Suit him up. There needs to be a fight at the end, right? Maybe they thought this was like just the natural, like it has to end with them fighting. Maybe that's just what the consensus was, what the initiative was. But yeah, I mean, I don't have a problem with it also. And this is kind of like a give me and a give out. But as you said, like, let's not lose sight of the fact that he was like hopped up on like a lot of very well established DC universe mentally enhancing and deteriorating drugs, right? So like he's completely out of his gourd. You know, I think that also goes a long way of why he's like, no, like I'm gonna suit up and I'm gonna go at him. That's also kind of a little backdoor, because how long ago prior to this story, and obviously for this episode I just focused solely on Public Enemy, so help me out here. How long ago was it established that he was taking the venom, the kryptonite, all that other stuff? Is it just in Public Enemies, or were there hints and breadcrumbs before?
No, it was just Public Enemies, unless there's something I'm like totally unaware of.
No, but that's actually, I think, gives them an out then, because if he just started it recently, that would also explain his irrational behavior.
Fair. And Batman does have a line about that towards the end of Public Enemies. I think he says the Bane venom would turn even a sane man irrational. And essentially Lex is not.
Doesn't he also say that about the kryptonite though too? With Superman? Like, wouldn't it affect you because the asteroids come?
Yeah.
Doesn't he say, wouldn't that affect you mentally? Like, well, you know, it could. And he's also injecting himself with that as well as the venom.
Yeah. I mean, there's that. Yeah, there is that. I guess not to give this story such a hard time, but I guess even just the fact that Lex would take that cocktail feels like
a
little bit much.
Sure.
Ultimately, I think what this comes down to your point, I think we want to resolve this storyline. We want to have this physical confrontation between them and this big finish. I get that. But I think more than anything, and I welcome more audience reactions to this. I really would be curious how people read this, but I think ultimately Lex just hates Superman so much, and he held it in throughout the campaign and his first term and Our World's at War, like as much as he possibly could. There's a point where he's talking to Captain Atom right before he declares the bounty on Superman's head. And he asks a series of what he calls rhetorical questions about putting the bounty on his head. He's like, do you think I'm just doing this out of a personal vendetta that the world is going to end and I just want to make sure I ruin Superman's life before that? And he says, these are rhetorical questions, but it's like, yeah, I mean, I really think that's it. And when they're fighting at the end of the story, he's like, not a single morning has gone by where I haven't woken up and thought about strangling you.
Yeah.
So I really think ultimately, I think that's it. It's just, like I said, what I've been so struck by in going through all of the President Lex business leading up to this was just kind of how he operated and what a contrast it was between that and what you would expect of him. And then to kind of see him devolve into what you would expect. And he's spouting the anti-alien rhetoric and all of that. It's just kind of but you know what? It's funny. I don't want to say, it's inevitable with these sorts of stories, but a while back we talked about the New Krypton storyline, which hit post Infinite Crisis before New 52. It was a sprawling year-plus long storyline. And in it, there's this like long stretch where Kal-El and Zod are forced to work together, and you see some sort of relationship, like partnership, respect, something, a working relationship develop between the two of them. And it was really intriguing and really refreshing. And there was a lot of business about that story being severely truncated or whatnot, but it's like all of a sudden there was this huge heel turn and Zod was just back to being the Zod that you would expect. And I just kind of have a similar sort of vibe here, but maybe there is just a sort of inevitability to this.
That always rubs me the wrong way, right? When you just see you see an interesting character development and then it's like undone.
Yeah. I mean, I think also too, a lot of this is fueled just by the larger context of what we've been talking about. But I think the way most people probably, especially these days, consume Public Enemies is probably in more of a vacuum, and this probably would not be an issue at all. You'd be like, oh yeah, like that's Lex, like that's that's what he does.
That's like how I consumed it this time around, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So like I said, I did put the call out to our patrons, that question specifically, and then I also just solicited kind of general comments or questions about Public Enemies. And I got a few, which again, speak to this shift in Lex, but also do get at this idea of the narration, the use of narration, which is a big part of the comic, wholly absent from the movie. And so this is another sort of kind of big ticket item that I want to talk about before we get more specifically into the beats of the story. So Logan said, he's talking about the shift with Lex, I felt like at the time it was very abrupt and out of character, and felt like it was another example of the trend at the time of post-crisis characters suddenly shape-shifting into their pre-crisis characterizations, continuity be damned. In hindsight, though, it does make some story sense, as we learned in Villains United and Infinite Crisis that Alexander Luthor Jr. had been blasting Lex with stupid rays or whatever that made him dumb. There was business with
Logan. Shout out to Stupid Rays. That made me laugh. Good job. That's a good one, Logan. I like that.
Yeah, I mean, there was that business about the pre-crisis Lex of Earth 3 and the effect that his presence on our Earth was having on Lex. I do feel like that was later. I don't know that would have been at play here, but yes, we'll grab whatever we can. Rick says, I feel like it was an abrupt shift and didn't at all seem like the Lex we had been getting to know for the last almost 30 years. It wasn't super annoying, but I wasn't the biggest fan of it when it happened. It also jettisoned him from the books, if I recall correctly, and to me, he had become a core character. I mean, he wasn't totally gone. I mean, after this, he keeps popping up in that green battle suit. He has a role in the first arc of the Supergirl title. But yeah, I mean, definitely a different, less prominent role than he had, especially as the president. And then Martin says, the Jeff Loeb's World's Finest. Some good moments, but almost always filtered through the incredibly annoying back and forth inner narratives or narrations of Superman and Batman. The opening storyline was pretty exciting, lots of fun moments, but yes, Lex going full Bronze Age did seem out of nowhere. Given this was just a couple of months before a Kryptonian Supergirl came back, it seemed the book had a yen for classic continuity stuff. And Rick responded to the bit about the narration. Rick says, I've had a love-hate relationship with the narration in comics. When it's well done, I enjoy it. However, in my opinion, it's getting overdone in a lot of books lately, and half the time when I see it, I get annoyed.
Who is that? That was Rick.
That was Rick, yeah. Rick and Martin, not mixed at best on the use of the narration.
Gentlemen, I'm a fan of both of you. I always, see you interacting. I appreciate you. What would you two do right now if I told you that you two are having an inner monologue battle right now, back and forth? If you think about it, even the little bubbles are there. So think about that. That just kind of tickled me. No, I mean, look, you're gonna love the movie if you don't if you don't love the bubbles in there. I can see, I suppose, an argument. Right. And I won't speak for anybody else because I enjoy it. I think it adds some interesting context into both of them, especially if you're a first time reader or maybe a lapsed reader, which is, to our point, accessibility with this story. I could see the argument where maybe it's, it gets to be a bit much. You kind of just want to get to more of the actual plot beats going on and more of the action beats. But I think it's important for both characters because we have seen so much of them separately. We've seen a lot of them together, even if it wasn't as immediately accessible as it is now, right? But what we haven't seen is what they actively in real time think of each other. And that's why I think that's special, because this is the first time I can recall being like, oh, like we actually in real time as it's happening, seeing their reactions and comparing their own personal lenses with each other as events are happening. And I thought that was unique and special. I don't think that should keep going on forever. But I think for the sake of this story, where it really is the two of them against the world, I think it does a lot to kind of show, not only the battles on the outside, but the battles they're kind of always wrestling within, and how we're not alone, right? You look at two people, and that's a beautiful thing. And sure, it might be cliche, but I also think it's true, right? Is that you look at Batman, you look at Superman on the outside, and they couldn't look, or act more different in so many ways. But from this, like they're much more similar than different. And I think that's the big overlying structure and point over this as well, too. And that, even if some of it might be taking up space, some of it might be a little heavy-handed, that's always an important message that I'm happy to see in any type of media or literature.
Yes. So I agree wholeheartedly. I do think if we have to sum up what the narration is accomplishing in this arc specifically. I do think it is showing those commonalities, showing what unites these two more than what separates them. And a specific example that really jumped out at me to kind of highlight this idea that they brought up, there's a bit where through the narration, Clark is talking about how Pa used to bring him to the football games at Smallville High.
Yeah, I like
and
this
the
story.
team would always lose. Yep. And Pa was like,
as a Jets fan, this speaks deeply to my soul. So
and Clark was like, well, Pa, why do we keep coming? And he's like, well, hope, Clark. We hope that maybe they'll win. And at the same time, Bruce is thinking about how he would walk the streets with now retired Commissioner Gordon. And Gordon would talk about this darkness that consumes the city. And Batman would say, why don't you move? There's nothing tying you here. And the answer, similar to what Pa relayed to Clark, was hope. So it's this idea that they're both being delivered the same message, the same lesson, different scenarios, different people, different situations and whatnot, but still kind of the same core takeaway. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I think it does show what unites them. It really shows this mutual respect between the characters. And I think that more than anything is what really drives the partnership. It's not like they're necessarily buddies who would hang out much, but
doesn't he say in the movie though, doesn't Superman say, I'm jumping around a little bit, doesn't Superman say in the movie, like, that was my best friend up there?
Yeah.
Yeah. I was like, that actually caught me by surprise. When I heard that, I was like, oh, wow. It was nice. Don't get me wrong. But that really jumped out at me.
Yeah. But at the same time, like I could understand why some folks might find the narration grating. It definitely slows down the reading process.
100%. Yes.
And there is a kind of an added layer here. We've talked a lot, and I've been singing the praises of Loeb's use of narration in the Superman title, and how it would always be a supporting cast member, primarily Lois, but we also had issues from the perspective of Perry, Pa, Ma, Jimmy, Ray Palmer, Emil Hamilton. Yeah. And that was great. I love that.
Yeah.
Almost never Clark though. So that's one of the things I really like here is now we get into Clark's head more, but it's not just Clark's narration. It's also Bruce's. So you do have these dueling narrations in the middle of all of the action. So it does slow down the process. But I mean, to me, it's like the difference between like a good solid meal and a feast, right? Like you take the narration away, which the movie does, and it's solid and you get some really great character beats between the two of them, but you don't get the same level of depth, nuance, insight that you do with the narration. Yeah. I mean, I feel like this puts it on a different level.
Yep. It ends up being such a cool case study almost of the two of them as people, as not Superman and Batman, but as Bruce and Clark. And we've, ad nauseum on the show have talked about that. Longtime listeners might also remember from us talking about Batman as well too, as he comes up in our frequent talks through Superman and the greater DC universe, that my preferred Batman isn't the Batman we've seen in most of the Hollywood blockbuster movies, the loner, right? My Batman, my favorite Batman, is the one that's like learned to love again, despite his traumas, and even if he's a little rough on the outside. And this definitely leans a little more into that, right? You see that friendship, that respect, even if he wouldn't say it himself out loud, he doesn't have to now. So you don't have to worry about, maybe taking too big of a leap with him, even though we saw leaps with Lex in a different way. We don't have to see too big of a leap with Bruce being like, I love you, you're my best friend. We don't need to see that. But through his internal dialogue, we can kind of see like, wow, he really does think the world of Clark in his own way. And I think that's so important because you're never going to get that outwardly from him. So it's cool to see that from an inward monologue.
100%. Oh, one of my favorite moments that speaks to this, I think, is when Batman and Superman are fighting this whole mass of villains when they're trying to get to Lex. Yep. And Bruce is thinking about how he's like, what a fascinating dichotomy. He's like, a lot of times I think of Clark as being more human than anybody. And then he rains fire down from the skies. And I can't help but think of him as a god, and how lucky we are that he doesn't think the same.
That might be my favorite line. I guess that there's a strong contender, right? I mean, that just sums up not only Clark as a character, but how Bruce feels about him as a character. I mean, that's beautiful.
Yeah. And then the return of that a couple of panels later, when Bruce is using his device on Silver Banshee to neutralize her cry. And Clark is thinking, I have to admit, sometimes I think of Bruce as a man in a suit. And then he whips out something like this, and I realize how inventive his mind is. So throughout the story, I mean, those are a couple of examples, but throughout the story, you see kind of those parallels that are drawn through the narration. And it may be one of the most, kind of in your face instances of this is the opening of the comic, where the two of them are recounting their origins, Kal-El's departure from Krypton and arrival on Earth, and the murder of the Waynes in Crime Alley. And they're recounting this, and you see, once again, the ways in which they're similar, both born out of this tragedy, but then, of course, they take very different turns. And Clark has a line there. He's like, I don't know how much of this I actually remember, or it's just kind of what I imagine, but you do, and you see from his perspective, like the little baby Kal-El being put in the rocket by Jor-El and Lauren. At this point in time, because I double-checked the release dates, Birthright was underway. So we now had kind of officially shifted away from the John Byrne, cold, sterile Krypton, where Kal-El wasn't even born on the planet, but instead was born via his birthing matrix on Earth, to, no, he's actually an infant baby on Krypton before the planet is destroyed.
So fascinating, the differences in one origin story over time that can take place. Yeah.
Yeah. And just this continued back and forth of Kal-El arriving on Earth, being found by the Kents. That's when his childhood began. Versus Bruce, that moment in Crime Alley, that's when his childhood ended.
They do such a good job of that.
Yeah. And Clark saying it's been a good life, and Bruce saying it's a life I wouldn't wish on anybody. So really, two sides of the same coin, ultimately pointed towards the same end game, but obviously different methods, but they've been able to forge this working relationship that you see on display. I wouldn't have expected the animated movie to utilize the narration. However, I feel like they left a little something on the table. I feel like this origin recap, that could have had a place maybe during the opening credits or before, right?
Selfishly, I need to hear those lines in Kevin Conroy and Tim Daly's voices.
Yeah.
That's what I need. I need that because, I'm sure I'm not the only one. I'm sure I'm speaking for the majority of people, at least our age. I read them in those voices. Like those are the voices. So I think, yes, that would have been, even if it was just like Bruce at the beginning of looking at his computer at a file on Superman or something like that, or Superman like floating and just pondering, or seeing the bat signal, right? And just, pondering about him. Yes, a little bit would have gone a long way because it's some beautiful writing.
Yeah.
It's some beautiful writing, I think.
Yeah. So in these opening couple of issues here, maybe we could take them a couple issues at a time, and we could bounce back and forth between the comic and the animated movie and talk about, like I said, where they line up, where they diverge. I will say overall with the animated movie, this is one I hold in relatively high regard. I think what elevates it a bit is the fact that we have Clancy Brown, Tim Daly, and the late great Kevin Conroy reunited. Yep. It's not officially part of the DCAU. It's not in that continuity, but you can't help but feel that it is, hearing those voices. And this was also an instance, and it really breaks my heart that we never got more animated movies like this, but it's a movie where the art style emulated the source material. So it looks like the art of Ed McGuinness on screen, which I always wish they did more of that.
So I'm actually the opposite of this, because I was watching it and I was like, this is good. I'm liking this, but something is off to me. And in my just so lizard brained DCAU, as soon as I hear their voices, I think I got over it. I got over this, to be clear, not seeing that in the same style and hearing like that power trio that we're so used to hearing, I think really kind of took me some time to calibrate to the art style. But then, like, how upset are you going to be? Like you said, they're doing a very good job of mimicking the source material, not just, the voice actor's history and lineage. But that took me a while to get used to.
All right.
So I'm used to hearing, those characters and, oh, this is this world. This is what this world looks like. I didn't even realize it till like probably 10 or 15 minutes in. I was like, what is it that's bothering me? But I really had to think. I was like, that's what it is.
Yeah. No, I can appreciate how something like that can cut both ways. But it's one of those things. One of the earliest original animated movies they did was New Frontier, very shortly after Superman Doomsday. And that one, it looked like Darwin Cook's art on the screen. Right, yeah. And I just always wanted them to do more in the style of the artist who drew the source material. And I feel like those instances were pretty few and far between, but I really did like that. But going back to the comics, we'll start there. So in these first couple of issues in particular, the first adversary encountered here is Metallo.
Our old
And
friend.
yeah, and we don't have to go beat by beat through everything, but this kind of sets up some key pieces. So Superman encounters Metallo tearing apart Star Labs, and they have a battle, and Metallo gets away. And Superman off panel learns some information from Star Labs, and that leads him to Batman, who's investigating this crime scene at a cemetery where all of these graves have been dug up. I love his narration here, by the way, where he's like, "This is the best part of the job, in the silence of the crime, in the rain before the police show up and trample all over everything." I'm like, yeah, that's Batman, man.
Yeah, he's got a little bit of the crazies. That's fine.
Yeah. So it turns out that Metallo is there and is trying to find his own body, his original physical remains that were buried, but he's dug up all of these other ones to throw Batman off the scent. And what we start to learn a little bit of here, we'll learn more in subsequent issues, is that the information that was contained in Star Labs here that Superman came upon is that John Corbin, who had been this petty thief before becoming Metallo, had operated out of Gotham City and was in Gotham on the night that Thomas and Martha Wayne were murdered. And we learn this later too, but that he used the same caliber gun that was used to kill Thomas and Martha Wayne. So the implication here potentially is that John Corbin, who would go on to become Metallo, was the actual murderer of Thomas and Martha Wayne.
How many people are we going to hold responsible for the death of the Waynes over the years? Like, how long a list is this at this point? You know?
Yeah. I mean, and this is really teased out. We only get a little hint of it here. We get more in the Batcave later. Batman is angry at Superman from keeping this for him. Clark is like, no, like I was on my way to tell you this. And by the end of the story, it turns out that this had been planted. It was meant to be a diversion. And I really like this bit. It comes at the very end of the story. I think it's Superman talking about this, where he's like, Lex didn't anticipate that Batman would put this aside to help me. Like, it was meant to get Batman out of the picture. And
that's what this story is about, isn't it? It's like their bond of friendship as well too. Not only doing the right thing, but Bruce putting that aside, because not only does the world need saving, but his friend also needs help.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, this came at a point in time. You talk about pre-crisis, post-crisis, post-infinite crisis. This has shifted a lot in terms of whether or not the murderer of the Waynes was some unknown, uncaught assailant, or Joe Chill, or somebody else. And just a few years after this, we would enter the post-infinite crisis landscape, and it would once again be the case that Joe Chill had murdered the Waynes. But at this point in time, it was unknown who killed the Waynes. And it was sort of...
Do you have a preference?
Oh, man, we'll save that for maybe another podcast that will come not too long from now. But I would just
folks,
say...
I like that.
I would just say I've gone back and forth over the years is kind of the short version. And I kind of see the value in both. But I guess ultimately, I don't feel that strongly, but I don't need it to be the case that the killer was never caught. And that's why Batman does what he does, because I don't think... It's like, even if the killer was caught, Batman would still do what he does.
Sure.
So that's kind of where I am. How about yourself?
I like the idea of it being Joe Chill as just like a low level gangster. Whether he's caught or not, I guess I could take or leave. I guess it's better if like he's caught or maybe like brought to justice. But I like the idea that it wasn't some grand supervillain. I think it speaks more to Batman more impactfully, where it was just like an everyday criminal, so to speak, and how dangerous. And it shows when you're running around Gotham City and you've got Joker, you've got Bane, you've got Mr. Freeze, and the whole rogues gallery. There's nothing more dangerous to a child, their family, and their happiness than just some bad guy with a gun in the wrong place at the wrong time. What's more scary than that? To me, that's more scary than any of those villains I just mentioned, because it's the most relatable, unfortunately, and realistic. And I think that goes a long way of framing Batman's mindset on crime.
I think it's in the opening pages when Bruce is recounting, and he says, like, I can only imagine the fear that went through my parents when that gunman stepped out. No, absolutely. Yeah. But this, I think, is one of the more memorable sequences in Public Enemies, either version, where there's this battle at the cemetery and Metallo shoots Superman with a kryptonite bullet, and he falls into one of these open graves, and Bruce jumps down because the kryptonite bullet is lodged in his chest, and he has to try to get it out before the wound closes up. And while he's working on it, Metallo buries them alive, essentially. And Bruce detonates an explosive that lands them in the sewer system, and they slowly hobble, Superman shot, and
if
Batman injured from the blast and the fall slowly
for
hobble.
some reason you never read this story or watched this movie and are still listening to this podcast, my cold open now makes perfect sense.
Yes. And this moment, I was very, very happy that the movie kept it. I feel like this is such a stand. I feel like this is one of those instances that just kind of just gives it this air of authenticity and kind of takes it beyond the realm of lesser fare when Clark's like, whatever happened to Magpie?
I do. I really enjoy that. I enjoy that a lot because it's like, it's not only showing like their comfort with each other, but also it shows indirectly their history with each other, right? You can tell they've been at this together for a long time. They can bring up people from their past, which is kind of a nice casual way of reinforcing that.
And beyond just their past generally, post-crisis continuity, Byrne's Man of Steel, Magpie was the first adversary that they encountered together in their first post-crisis meeting. And Bruce is like, I think she died. And Clark goes, why is it the good villains never die?
Great deliveries by both of them, too, on those lines. I might be a bad person, but I laughed when I heard Kevin Conroy in the movie say, I think she died.
Yeah, but then why is it the good villains never die? It's like, Clark, what the hell are good villains?
Right. It's some good stuff there. It's a good buddy comedy.
And even before that, when they're in the grave and Clark has his line about, where's the Flash when you need him? Bruce is like, do me a favor, lose the sense of humor. Clark says, do us both a favor, buy a sense of humor.
Yeah.
But just moments like that. And the bit about the good villains, it's like, I don't, just the notion of that thought crossing Clark's mind of like, oh, these people I have to deal with all the time. Like, right. Kill one of them.
It's almost like he's like ranking his coworkers. Like in that, right? It's quite funny.
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously, eventually they make their way to the Batcave and Alfred, who's waiting for them, and he's able to patch up Superman and wash his uniform and all of that. There's an interesting development here in the Batcave in the second issue where we have the arrival of an older Superman from the future who's dressed like the Kingdom Come Superman and has this dire warning and is there to kill the both of them because they've made some horrific mistake and he's trying to prevent that from happening. And I guess before I go further, what was your read on this? Did you enjoy this aspect of the story? What's your feeling?
I didn't remember this happening, if I'm being perfectly honest with you, from back in 2003 to now. After having watched the movie, I think it reinforced my notion that it's probably not necessary. And that's also that they came to that conclusion as well. I'm not against it. Like anytime I see a gray-haired Superman, I'm happy because, that's what my hair looks like now. And I feel seen. So, yeah, right. So there you go. That's always fun. And also like, it looked like the Kingdom Come Superman, but it was not the Kingdom Come Superman. Right. I'm correct in understanding all this. Like, what are we doing here? Like, what is the point of like, if you're going to have him be an interesting, different Superman from a failed timeline, make him interesting. Why are you copying and pasting Kingdom Come Superman? Like, I don't understand that.
Yeah, it's one of those things I 100% get why the animated movie jettisoned that. It really lifted right out. And I think probably would have been confusing to audiences. I mean, I don't know. This one's a tough one because looking at Public Enemy's totally in a vacuum, even just the comic totally in a vacuum, it's like, I don't know how much it adds. I mean, I'm really jumping ahead, but later Captain Atom, after he's seemingly blown to smithereens, he'll wind up in the future and he'll encounter that Superman again. And
the hero of this story is one of the points I'll throw in as well too, which is kind of cool.
And I mean, he'll return to the present and he'll assume command of the composite Superman Batman robot and he'll pilot it into the asteroid, seemingly sacrificing himself. He'll be back later too. So it pays off even within the confines of this particular arc, but it's not until the Absolute Power storyline in a couple of arcs. Do you remember this one in Superman Batman where this is?
Yes, I haven't read it in a while, but yes, I do remember reading it back when.
Yeah. I mean, the long story short, then we have a lot of timeline manipulations. That's kind of the long and short of it. But what you find out in that story is that this future Superman is not the Kingdom Come Superman, despite his appearance. He's actually the Superman from whatever happened to the Man of Tomorrow. And in Absolute Power, after the timeline is set right, you see him revert to that look from the end of whatever happened, and he's there with Lois at the door, and he gives the wink and all of that. So I guess
why though?
Huh?
Why even mess with that? Like, why even go there? Like, that's my big. What does that add? Except being like, yo, remember this story? You all love this story, right?
It's a bold
Like,
strategy, Cotton. Let's see if it pays off for that.
that's exactly right.
Yeah, I mean it's I guess the use of the future Superman in the Kingdom Come costume in Public Enemies in and of itself, it just overall it just feels pretty fan baity. It's like you want people to think it's going to be the Kingdom Come Superman, and it's not.
Yeah.
And then when you do ultimately get that payoff later, I mean, at the time, I know I've told this story before, but I was so excited. And this was the point in time, my best buddy from high school, he got into comics and he had a pull list at Alternate Realities. And this was one of the books he read. And I remember getting on the phone with him after this issue came out. And like, I chewed his ear off about what that last page of Absolute Power was all about. I was explaining whatever happened and Crisis on Infinite Earths. And he was such a good sport, but he was
You were having this podcast before the podcast.
That's the thing. But I was thinking about this. I was like, yeah, that's why I didn't have a podcast. That's what I did. So for me, it's ultimately a pretty cool payoff. Like I just remember that feeling reading Absolute Power back in the day and be like, oh, that's the one. Look, it's fun and it puts them in a tough situation. The future Superman has a great line about you'll be amazed at the alliances you've yet to make. So speaking about this future, working with Darkseid and whatnot, but I want to jump to the opening portion of the animated movie here because some interesting things at play, I think. So we talked a lot about Metallo in the comics and this hint, this notion that he's the actual killer of the Waynes. That is completely absent from the animated movie. They don't delve into that at all. I'm a little mixed on that because it puts some meat on the bone for Batman.
Yeah.
But at the same time, and we'll get to this, the animated movie gives Batman something else much bigger to do at the climax of the movie. It puts Batman, not Captain Atom, in that robot. So
the biggest difference. Yeah.
I guess that feels like a fair enough trade-off. And I was alluding to this earlier. The animated movie, I think, uses Metallo much more effectively because in the animated movie, the reason why Lex puts the bounty on Superman's head, it's not he's the reason this asteroid is coming towards Earth. Instead, he stages this scene where it appears to the public as if Superman is killing Metallo. And that to me felt far more reasonable and believable than what we got in the comic.
They did what is so rare when we're talking about a comic to a film adaptation. They made what happened in the comic look silly, I think, in comparison to what they did in the film, right? Because when you just lay it out like that, being like, nope, listen, man, that's made of the same stuff as the planet he came from. It's got to be him. It's got to be him that's bringing it here. Versus, no, like, your hero, hero's just murdered somebody and I have proof. Like, yeah, man. Like, that makes much more sense.
Yeah, because in the animated movie, President Lex arranges this meeting with Superman. Metallo is there, and they mix it up, and they actually do fight. But obviously, Superman doesn't kill him. But then Major Force arrives and finishes Metallo off. But then when you look at the edited news footage and the aftermath, it appears that Superman killed him. And that felt like far less of a leap for both Lex and the public as to why he would be a public enemy. So I really, really liked that change in the animated movie. You know, the other thing that's interesting to me about the animated movie, especially in light of all of our President Lex discussions, so it opens with kind of this look at the country in the midst of this severe economic downturn, and this is what paves the way for Lex's rise as the one to usher the country out of that. And then we relatively quickly get to Lex's inauguration, and even there, you're already seeing like the LC, the Luthor Corp logos on everything.
Yeah.
But here's what was fascinating to me in the animated movie, and I get that they had to get here faster than the comic did. But unlike the comic, where he was really seemingly extending an olive branch to the superhero community, here from the jump, no one is above the law, not even Superman. Mm-hmm. And it's all about how if superheroes want to operate, they need to do it under his authority, under his direction. Sure. And you see the superheroes he's already assembled, like Captain Atom and Starfire. And we have Power Girl is probably the most notable one, particularly in the animated movie, where I think a lot of the kind of battle for the soul of the superhero community is kind of pinned on Power Girl.
Right. Well, let me ask you, my curiosity also was spiking when reading this and also watching this. Those characters that were chosen, why do you think those characters were the ones that were chosen with Lex. Were there in other comics leading up to this, like seeds planted? Or was it just like, these are the characters we feel like using? I mean, Captain Atom and I think certainly Major Force makes sense for like the role that he's playing. I get that Captain Atom with his military background makes sense, but I was curious if you had any more like in-depth insight as why those. I think Power Girl, like you said, is a good choice because of the Kryptonian lineage, but is there any other like deeper rhyme or reason you think for any of these characters to be included that I'm missing?
Yeah, I mean, that is a good question. I guess the short answer is no. I mean, Black Lightning, Jefferson Pierce, was a member of Lex's cabinet. Right. I think Secretary of Education.
Right.
So he already kind of had that, that connection point. And in the comics, the movie doesn't use him, but the comics also make John Stewart, Green Lantern, part of this.
I was like very surprised to see him there.
But I guess like Captain Atom and Major Force and John Stewart, there's this military component and background. Yeah. So the notion that, and I think both versions of the story address this. I think the animated movie, I think spends more time on this idea at least.
There's that whole wonderful conversation with Clark and Power Girl being like, what do you think of him? He goes, he's the president. He goes, well, how do you feel? He makes my skin crawl.
Yeah.
And that's a very good assessment as well too, between following orders and, taking a minute and feeling what you feel and observing what you observe.
Yeah, exactly. So I think both stories, address this notion of despite what they might think or feel or believe about Lex, that he is the duly elected president, and he's been tasked that they've been tasked with this. And so I think you kind of see the tough spot that they're in. But yeah, like I said, it was just kind of interesting that from the jump in the movie, we have Lex with kind of his anti-alien, anti-superhuman sentiment, but I was
waiting for him to say task force, but he never said task force, I was waiting. It's always a task force, but yeah.
There's also a great recurring bit. I forget if the animated movie does as much with this. I don't think they do, but in the comic, definitely it makes me laugh how every time Captain Atom wants to talk to Lex, it's never a good time. And Lex constantly chastises him for his poor timing. I just found that amusing.
There are two standout characters for different reasons that aren't Batman, Superman, and Lex that get top billing, right? There's two standout characters in this story, and I've already alluded to this as well. But to me, it's Captain Atom and it's Captain Marvel, now known as Shazam. Those are the two I think, and we'll get to Billy in a little bit. But the Captain Atom I think has such a good full arc here of showing everybody why he's a hero and why he's important. And I wonder if like this was the plan, like to push this character specifically, or if they just wanted a character to have this arc in general. Either way, I think they do such a good job. After reading this, I was like, you know what? I want to see some more Captain Atom. I like this guy. I think it really did its job. Like, it's so rare coming away from a seminal Batman Superman story and saying, I want to read more Captain Atom. Like, that's how to me at least, they've done something special here.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, he definitely has an arc. He really does. I think him more than anybody, you really do appreciate the tough spot that he's in, especially, Major Force is an out-and-out villain. He murdered Kyle Rayner's girlfriend, in the beginning of that run. So
starting that old trope that we go back to again and again, unfortunately.
Yeah, exactly. But make sure I have all the players in this. So in the animated movie, right, we have Captain Atom, Major Force, Power Girl, Starfire, and Katana. And in the comic, we have that quintet and John Stewart.
John Stewart was not in the film, to the best of my recollection as well. Yeah. Okay. John Stewart also has that military background, though, right?
Yeah.
So that's also probably an out for that as well, to our point. Yeah.
And then, of course, in both stories, right, we have this huge Kryptonite asteroid barreling towards Earth. And in both versions of the story, there's an attempt to blast it with missiles, and the attempt fails. Now, they play out slightly differently. I think both interesting in their own right. So in the comic, Captain Atom clocks the fact that Lex has used boom tube technology to get the missiles to the asteroid quickly. And this
only comes from one place.
Yeah, I mean, this points to this larger alliance, and this goes back to our Worlds at War, where they had aligned against Imperiex. So I always just kind of find that intriguing. The animated movie doesn't get into the dark side of it all, but it's interesting because there's this recurring bit in the movie about how Lex is so confident because he was the one who did the calculations.
Yeah. And that speaks so well to the hubris of it all too, right? Like you know, which is a nice touch as well too. I mean, yeah, I mean, we didn't need darks. I'm glad. I think they made a very smart decision once again, because I think if you're reading in continuity, it's nice to have the boom tubes and the dark side connection. But for an hour-long movie, we don't need that. Also, sidebar, I love that this was an hour. I love that it was short and sweet and got to the point. I don't think that as a detriment. People might disagree, but I love and appreciate that 2 episodes with commercials of Justice League Unlimited. You know, it is essentially what we got here, and that's a compliment. Again, not a disservice.
Yeah, they do get you in and out. I did appreciate, especially.
Yeah.
We're always busy. We're always pressed for time. And it had been a long time since I had rewatched this movie. And so last night, as I looked at the runtime, I saw 67 minutes and I'm like, all right. And that's even with credits. I'm like, all right, I can bang this out.
Same thought. I was like, oh, I did all my homework. Let's get the last bit of it done. Easy street. Easy street.
A couple of things about the asteroid. So there's, I would say the most famous episode of the George Reeves Adventures of Superman series is Panic in the Sky, where you have this huge asteroid filled with kryptonite approaching Earth. And that story has been retold on the Superboy television series and Lois and Clark as well. So a grand tradition when it comes to a giant asteroid. But, you know, one of the interesting things about the asteroid is that no, Superman was not willing the asteroid to Earth. He's not responsible in the way that Lex claims in the comic specifically.
How would he even do that? Like that's.
But and this is kind of the ironic part about it. The asteroid was coming because of him. What we find out in the next arc of Superman Batman is that it contained Kara. Look, I know the TV shows call her Kara. In my head, she's always Kara. That's what they called her on Smallville in the animated series. So it's carrying Kara Zor-El's ship. And there's even, because I flipped through the Supergirl arc just to refresh my memory. I think Batman and Superman do have a discussion about this. And I think Batman says, he's like, you know, Luthor wasn't insane after all. Like there was a reason why this was coming here.
I completely forgot about that, but I love that actually. I do love that. I like that Lex Luthor had a nugget of truth in there, right? But that's kind of interesting. I appreciate that.
Yeah, and in the comic, the reason he learns about the asteroid so quickly and why he is quote unquote right in the sense that it's coming here because of Superman is because of intel he got from Darkseid. Fat Moose Comics, established in 1982, is New Jersey's best and oldest comic book store. Led by current owner Sean Hendricks, Moose has that rare, old-school comic shop feel and camaraderie, yet also remains a welcoming space for new fans. If you're looking for something and they don't have it, they can probably get it for you. They know a guy. Visit Fat Moose in Whippany the next time you are in the Garden State, and be sure to reach out via the Fat Moose Comics Facebook page. We all love the big-budget superhero films, but the world of independent cinema remains a place of unbridled creative freedom and entrepreneurial spirit. Whether you're an independent filmmaker yourself or you just love movies, don't miss these New Jersey film festivals. Brightside Tavern in Jersey City, Hang On to Your Shorts in Asbury Park, and Round Reel in Bloomfield. Submission information for filmmakers can be found at filmfreeway.com. Follow the festivals on social media for news about events, discounts, tickets, and much more. Aw Yeah Comics celebrates everything that is wonderful about comics, toys, artwork, and the joy they bring to people. Visit them in person at one of their 3 locations, Harrison, New York, Muncie, Indiana, or Skokie, Illinois, home to our pal, Sweet Sweet Bernie. If you have children and have been looking for a family-friendly store, look no further. Join Aw Yeah for exciting events, including creator signings, how-tos, and more. Visit awyeahcomics.com and follow them on social media. Their name says exactly how they feel about it. Say it with me now. Aw yeah. But yeah, so I mean, we have this revelation about the asteroid, this charge that it's coming here because of Superman, and this initial attempt to try to destroy it, and then this placing of the bounty on Superman's head. So I think, you know, kind of at this point in the story, in both the comic and the animated movie, they track fairly closely in the sense that we have these battles with the villains of the DC universe, many of whom turn out to be under the control of Gorilla Grodd. And then we have the arrival of Lex's team of superheroes who Superman and Batman initially think are there to help. And then it turns out they're not. And that battle continues. And then Hawkman and Captain Marvel, aka Shazam, are brought in. And you know, we'll kind of go through those beats. But One of the things that I was really disappointed with respect to the animated movie, no place for Lois other than that little cameo at the end when
I
she shows
know.
up. You know,
Yeah, right. That you're right. That is a little bit of a disservice. I think we gotta have like a little more, little more lines, dialogue, a little something to do there. I did like it, and I'm jumping around again, of course. I did like at the end of the animated film that he Clark says, "Hey, Lois and I are gonna get together. You should stick around. You should." I did like that, but yeah, we needed some more Lois. I don't disagree there.
well, for a couple of reasons. So I thought, look, I mean, even in the comics, she does not get a lot of play. I mean, it's a
Mhm.
busy story. There's a lot going on, but
Certainly.
I think it's at the start of issue 3 where Superman and Batman hatch their plan. To Clark, it's simple. To Bruce, he knows that there's a lot of different forces at play here. But the
Yeah.
idea is that Lois has landed this live television interview with President Luthor. And in the midst of this, Superman is going to show up and like, confront him on live television. But then they get intercepted by these villains and it doesn't go according to plan. But I just said to myself as I was rereading the comic, I'm like, this device of Lois interviewing Lex, you guys could have made a meal out of this. And
Oh yeah.
we had Clancy Brown, we had Tim Daly, we had Kevin Conroy. Justice for Dana Delaney. I mean, I feel like this was they really left something on the
Give me
table
the
here.
first. You ever see the movie Frost Nixon?
Yeah.
Give
Yes.
me like a little bit, just a minute or two of that, of her like grilling Lex Luthor. I would love that. Yeah, that'd be awesome.
Because, you talk about how short the movie is. We've talked about this. Those animated movies initially were usually confined to like 75 minutes for budgetary reasons. This, like we said, was even shorter than that. So I feel like you guys had like a few more minutes maybe that you
Yeah,
could have played with.
This is like one of the few times where I really, yeah, I wouldn't have been mad if you tacked another 5, 10 minutes on there. Sure, we had room to run.
Yeah. So that was a bit of a bummer. But yeah, I mean, I love like all of these battles with the villains. It's quite an assortment here. Who do we go up against? I mean, Solomon Grundy, Mongol, Silver
Born on a
Banshee.
Monday. What does Bruce say that makes me laugh? He sounds like Henry Thoreau. Who does he says like
Yeah.
somebody that made me laugh. That was good too. And also Superman saying, "Oh, I thought I heard a gorilla's heartbeat." That was a nice touch, right? Because it shows his like we always like to talk about here, how sometimes, especially compared to Bruce, Clark gets the short end of the stick of his intelligence, but that he's very clever in his own right as well too. So I like that little line as well.
Yeah, well, even going back to earlier in the story when Clark is talking about John Corbin being in Gotham and all of that, and
Yep.
Bruce is kind of surprised, and Clark is like, "Yeah, it's called investigative journalism." It's like
That's exact. Yes, to your point, exactly right. Yep.
so I liked that. But yeah, as they're contending with these villains, both Clark and Bruce are clocking a couple of things. Most of these villains are uncharacteristically silent. You also have someone like Mongol, who's an intergalactic despot. It's like he would have no
Yes.
need for $1 billion. And then you have someone like Solomon Grundy, who is inexplicably articulate all of a sudden.
Yeah.
So it turns out that initial group was being controlled by Gorilla Grodd. But then, yeah, even
Also,
more.
where's the Flash when you need him?
Where, yeah,
As he said earlier, right? I thought that was cute. I don't know if that was intentional or not, but that little the joke, where's the Flash when you need him? And then you get Gorilla Grodd there. I thought that was kind of cute as well too. Intentional or not.
yeah. I mean, it's funny. Like I was thinking about this. It's like this is such a big story, really. That's confined to these 6 issues, and it's one of those things. Like this could have been a whole DC wide event. I mean,
Yeah.
in the end, I think it served the story to not be that. Like I'm glad it was this contained arc, but
It was a little, and it's not going to make or break, especially with us comic book fans. We're the masters of suspending our disbelief here, right? But like there was never a line being just like, other than like, oh, like, where's the Flash when you need him? There was never a line like sometimes in comics, at least you get like I don't want to say a lazily, that does disservice to people, but like, oh, they put a force field around the city, or no, the Avengers are in space, or like, like there was nothing to be like, no, like, why are we not just like, why don't you just at least call Green Arrow in? He hates authority. I know he's going to be the first one who's going to be happy to shoot some arrows at Lex in the cabinet,
Yeah.
They never mention anything like that, correct?
well, so that's interesting, right? So again, at this point, I think in terms of the battles with the heroes and the villains, the movie and the comic track fairly closely. We don't need to to kind of split hairs on exactly how it plays out in each, but specifically looking at the comic. I guess a couple of things. One, I assume all of this happens over a pretty concentrated period of time, which
Yeah.
maybe we can use to kind of account for why there aren't more
It probably
involved.
takes place in like a 24, 48 hour,
Yeah,
right? Yeah, that's fair to say, I think.
there's probably that. I mean, also too, I'm sure from Superman's perspective, he probably doesn't want to involve that many people. It's probably enough that he's got Batman by his side. And so maybe there's that.
And he's wanted, so he doesn't want to bring that on
Right.
everybody else. Right. Okay. Okay. I smell what you're cooking
But
here.
then there's when we get a little bit deeper into the story and Mr. Terrific at JSA headquarters is tasking Hawkman and Captain Marvel with intervening to bring them to justice. He does have a line about how Wonder Woman contacted him and she feels if the Justice League get involved, it's going to be World War III. So
Gotcha,
it does seem
okay. So there's the line I was looking for.
Yeah.
Okay.
But so
okay.
there is kind of this business about there's this conscious decision on the part of the Justice League. I mean, look, that's the thing. I like this, the difficult spot that the heroes of the DC universe are put in between following the orders of this madman in the Oval Office. And there's even a line at the start, I think, of issue 6 where Clark is like, there's a madman in the White House. And I read that and I said, you're telling me.
Anthony, I have been sitting here clenching, saving my comments, quips, and my one-liners because I don't want to derail this podcast. But yes, it's so nice to read a piece of fiction that is in no way at all reflective of our reality. And I'll leave it at that. Well, is what I'll do.
You know, look, in all of our discussions of President Lex, I keep coming back to this idea. And when we did our devoted President Luthor episode, my main thesis was I felt that based on what we saw at that point in the comics, that the comparison between Trump and Lex was very unfair to Lex. But now that we're into absolutely. Public enemies territory.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Now I'm saying to myself, oh, there he is.
Yeah.
There he is.
The train is officially off the rails here. Yeah.
Especially when Lois is interviewing Lex and he claims to have this evidence that proves Superman is responsible for the asteroid. And she's like, well, where is it? And he's like, well, I'll share it when the time is right. It's like, okay.
Some asteroids, I assume, are good people.
Yeah. But no, I was going to say is just that I feel like this whole notion of what decision each hero is going to make. I feel like that there's probably more that could have been done with that because here's Superman and Lex and they're caught between.
And I know this is a Superman Batman story, excuse me. And we have a jam-packed cast in here with so many characters. If I could add one, you know what I would love to see? Because not only do I think plot-wise and character-wise it would be great, but also the timeline. I'd have to check the exact dates, but of Justice League Unlimited, where he really got his spotlight is, if you gave me the question in this as well, too, well, I can't involve any of these heroes. Who can we talk to maybe give us some information, help us on the inside? This seems like this situation is tailor-made for the question, and I would have loved to see him involved.
Yeah. Yeah, that would have been cool. Well, also, too, because we talked in our President Lex episode about Superman 165. I think that was the Christmas issue with Superman and Lois with the ornaments on the cover. And that was the one where you have Superman visiting with each member of the Justice League to give them their Christmas present. But they're also talking about Lex being elected. And you get each hero's reaction to it. And I won't go through all of them again. But it would have been interesting now that it's like the issue is being forced to now revisit those characters and actually have them be part of the action. So yeah, I am a little bit bummed, but I get it. And look, it did keep the focus more squarely on Superman and Batman, in fairness.
Despite my fan casting here. Like that's what's important ultimately. And I get that. I don't begrudge them for that. You got to keep that. They did an admirable job, even with like all of these characters coming in and giving them, ranging from like a few lines to actual arcs, just still keeping that lens on Clark and Bruce. So I get that because we don't want to lose focus of the core of what's happening here.
There's a point in the battle after they've taken out Grodd, but then more villains are converging because it's $1 billion bounty, right? So, I mean, it's this insane scenario that the president would put $1 billion bounty on somebody's head, but it brings everyone out of the woodwork. And there's this great...
Just wait, Anthony.
Yeah, I know. But there's this great point where Superman and Batman, they're side by side or back to back. And Bruce is like, I think we can take them. And Superman's like, you always think we can take them. And he goes, well, I do. Yep. He's like, all right, let's do it. Like these two, like ride or die. Like I love these two. And like I was saying before, like just to take these two, make them these underdogs in this sort of situation. I love it.
And what's the number one complaint that we always get as Superman fans, and you've always brought up on here, is Superman's too strong. He's too powerful. How do you put him in danger? How do you do a situation like this? Then you legitimately make them the underdog, right? Both him and Batman. That's another great example that next time somebody says that, just read this, watch this. Hopefully you'll understand. Save us the breath. But yes, they're underdogs, and we love an underdog story, and we love seeing how our heroes are going to not only fight their way out of this one, but use those big investigative brains of theirs as well too to get out of it.
Yeah. So like I said, here we now have the Lex's superhuman team intervene. Seems like they're there to help, but instead they battle. Superman creates a vortex to incapacitate them.
Yep.
And then they reconvene in Tokyo because, as we'll learn, Superman and Batman's plan is to enlist the Japanese toy man Hiro Nakamura, who had been introduced in an earlier issue of the Superman title by Loeb and McGuinness.
And soon we're going to get to the gripes here.
Oh, okay. All right.
I have a gripe. You could probably guess what it is a little bit.
Maybe. But, there's all this business, and it is addressed in Superman Batman in the comic about Hiro's grandfather created the metallo alloy.
Yes.
And all of that. But he's this young genius inventor, and so they go to Japan. And the battle continues, and we have this bit where Katana slices Major Force's arm, and this is going to release all of his energy, and they can't contain it. And Captain Atom seemingly sacrifices himself in order to contain this blast. Like I was saying before, he ultimately ends up in the future, and he'll return for the climax of the story.
Sacrifice himself again.
In the movie, it plays out differently. The battle, I think, takes place in Metropolis, and it's Power Girl, I think, who plunges
They never go to Tokyo.
No.
Right? No. Yeah.
We don't have that No, I mean, we do ultimately get to Hero, but yeah, we don't have that battle in Tokyo.
Right.
But yeah, I think in the movie it's Power Girl, right, who punctures Major Force and all of that. But again, still a lot of the similar beats. As I was saying before, with the movie, you definitely get more play for Power Girl in terms of where her loyalties lie.
That's why Katana was there originally. They were like, we need somebody who uses something sharp to puncture this arm. Get me Katana.
By the way, Power Girl in the animated movie voiced by none other than Allison Mack, Chloe Sullivan herself.
How about that? Which is cool on the one hand because of Smallville, but also not cool for a whole bunch of other things as well too. Yep. My goodness.
At the time, it's very cool. Now it's like, man.
Yeah, I know. Sad, the way things turn out sometimes. Yeah.
Yeah. But then we have this, well, in the comic, you have Katana and Power Girl. I don't know, double agent is the right word, but they ultimately, in the comic, it's kind of like they've always been sort of aligned with Superman and Batman, and they assist in this point in getting to Hero. But this is when now they're intercepted by Hawkman and Captain Marvel, and we get, oh man, how did all of this play for you?
Oh boy, I'm so glad you asked me that. When we first talked about this, the very first memory that popped into my mind from Public Enemies was this fight, and it was castling, which I still think is the coolest thing ever. And also, maybe even more than that stands out is, oh my God, say something to me, Shazam. And that is like my favorite Captain Marvel Shazam moment ever, if I'm being honest with you, because how often do you see anybody, let alone, with all due respect, as we've spent some time talking about Captain Marvel and Shazam on this podcast as well too, but for that character to get one over on Batman, I think is just absolutely tremendous. And what a clever way coming up with that idea and the writing. I love that. That might be like a top 10 comic book fight scene for me, if I'm being honest with you. I just adore it.
Yeah, it was very satisfying. I mean, the Superman Captain Marvel matchup, obviously we've experienced that before.
Magic.
But always,
also done very well in the animated series.
Yes,
as well too, as we talked about. Yep.
But it's always fun to see. I really liked the Batman Hawkman pairing, and in just a couple of years we'll get JLA Crisis of Conscience, and I've cited this moment before. But this great bit, this is after Identity Crisis, and Batman learned that the Justice League had tinkered with his memory and erased 10 minutes years earlier.
Talk about a formative story. That's a formative story for me as well too.
Yeah, but in that Crisis of Conscience follow-up story, Batman punches Hawkman and knocks him down. And as Hawkman's I've quoted this line so many times, but it's like seared into my brain. He's like, to Batman, he goes, "I hope that was worth it, because I'm about to give you 10 minutes you'll never forget." It's like, oh, it's so good.
Man, here we go.
But yeah, I mean, the use of these JSA characters was interesting in and of itself, kind of in line with what we're talking about whether or not to follow these orders. But they do go along with trying to bring Batman and Superman to justice. And then, this business about castling where they switch
Yes.
who they're fighting, and Superman is flying Hawkman up, to the atmosphere to try to get him to pass out. But then Hawkman pops him with that claw.
Yeah.
And we have Billy using the lightning, which you were already talking about before, to incapacitate Batman. And I mean, that issue ends with the two of them apprehended.
Triumphant. Yeah. For a rare W, dare I say, for Hawkman and then Captain Marvel.
Yeah, but look, when it comes to Superman and Batman, there's more to their castling, which we'll find out, and that's such a satisfying payoff. But that leads to the penultimate issue of the storyline, which features very prominently the Superman and Batman families, and this is completely absent from the animated movie. Understandably, I guess.
I was gonna say, I get why. I get you want to keep that runtime tight and the focus on them as well too. Yeah, I get it. I didn't dislike it in the comics. I didn't think it, I mean, I thought it didn't, even in the comics, didn't take up so much of our time. I felt like that it was like an unnecessary diversion completely. It didn't really bother me. What were your thoughts on checking in with them?
Yeah, no, I was on board with it. Issue 5. So apparently, even though Superman and Batman have not been delivered to the authorities, they put the word out that they've been apprehended, and it's all a ploy by Lex to try to get them to reveal themselves. But I guess it also has this unintended effect of bringing forth the Batman and Superman families to try to find their guys. Yeah. And so they infiltrate the White House, and there are some
How cool is Nightwing? He's always so cool. How cool is Nightwing in this, right? Like, come on.
No, that's the thing. I mean, it ultimately culminates in this face-off in the Oval Office with Lex, and he reveals he's been pumping the room full of this odorless nerve gas. And, Huntress and Robin and Bat, they go down pretty quickly, but Nightwing is standing the longest. Like, oh man, it was badass. I really did like that.
I should save this for what may or may not be another podcast in the future, as you learned before, but I'll throw this out here and I'll see if I get some comments on this one. Dick Grayson is my favorite Batman.
Right on.
I have a lot to say about his run, taking the mantle and all that stuff too. So anytime I get to see Dick Grayson as Nightwing or Batman or anybody being a cut above and standing up, oh man, I loved it. It makes me want to cheer.
Yeah, no, it was such a strong moment. And just, it's funny, it's that issue, I think maybe more than any of the others, now that I'm thinking about it, is very much a time capsule of that era of the comics, especially on the Superman side, because it has the Sierra Supergirl, who had a very, very distinct life in the comics. As she was introduced during the Stephen T. Siegel run on Superman. He was on the book for like a year, culminating in issue 200. So it was a relatively short period of time, but it was during this period. Yeah. And so she's there with Crypto and Superboy in his t-shirt and jeans look, and all that. You have Natasha
we just
Irons.
Talked about that not too long ago.
Yeah, exactly. So I kind of like it for that, and just to see those characters get some play. So it was fun. I get why the movie, skipped over that, but I liked it in the comic. But yeah, then we get this reveal in the White House of seemingly Captain Marvel and Hawkman, but then the reveal that it's actually Superman and Batman in disguise.
Happy Halloween, Lex.
That they needed to buy time for Power Girl and Katana to get to Hero. And so they allowed themselves to be captured and then were able to blindside the other two heroes and take their place.
Yep. It's comic book. This is going to sound like it's negative, but it's not. It's comic book nonsense at its absolute best in my favorite, because like, if you look like outside and be like, yeah, they dressed up in their costumes and went in, you might think it's silly, but the way that it's here, you're just like, man, hell yes. This is so cool and so smart. And it's so cool seeing them in those different costumes as well too. Even just like the visual spectacle of it, I was like, this is really interesting and unique. Like, when are we going to see this again? I really dug it.
I mean, the only thing that's silly is that they put those costumes on top of their, it's like Superman rips off the chest and there's a symbol underneath.
Here's my other question. Are Hawkman and Captain Marvel now dressed up as Superman and Batman? Or are they just naked?
I think those dudes are just naked somewhere, to be honest.
I mean, they're fit. Nothing to be ashamed of. You know what I mean? Do what you got to do.
Yeah, but this is, I've quoted this moment so many times that part of me is like, I'm a broken record, but this is hands down, I mean, I guess it's not one of my top 10 moments because it didn't make it into the episode we just did, but
Sure.
it's one of my all-time favorite moments and maybe my favorite moment of Superman, Batman, Public Enemies when Superman grabs Lex and he's so angry and the red eyes flare and he's not even saying anything to Lex, but through his narration, he's talking about how my dad taught me when a fox gets into the chicken house, you have to put him down or you're going to have more dead chickens.
Yeah.
Was the gist of it.
Yeah.
And he's holding him and Lex is really goading him and essentially saying like, do it. If you do it, you'll be despised. All these other so-called heroes will be demoralized. It'll be the end of you. Wants. It's what I've always wanted. Do it. And then this Batman moment.
Yeah.
He's like, he says to Superman, he goes, I'm not going to stop you. There are ways we can make it look like an accident or better yet, like he disappeared without a trace. Now, before I revisited this.
What a badass. My God.
That's the thing. Before I went back to this recently, I thought my mind was playing tricks on me because I was thinking about this moment. I'm like, wait a minute, have I missed something all these years? Like, did Bruce actually mean that? Or was that just a bluff? But no, rereading it, there's this narration where he is very explicit and he's like, I was in a situation, great callback to Hush.
Yep.
Where he's like, I was in a situation recently with the Joker. Jim Gordon talked me down. I am not Jim Gordon.
Yeah. So good. I am not Jim Gordon. Just, fantastic stuff. Fantastic stuff. It's Bruce is the friend that you want in a bar fight, maybe not always in an ethics class, right?
It's like, oh my God. I was going to say, I'd be curious to hear from the hardcore Batman fans. I mean, I count myself in that group. Like I love that.
I think we both do, right? I'm sure most people listening to this also do, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think there's probably a debate to be had about whether this totally tracked from Batman's perspective, but in this moment, I found it so satisfying. I think for the biggest reason being that it shows this partnership between them and how they have each other's backs. And I feel like this is one of those moments, like if this were in a movie in particular, like this would get a reaction from the audience because it's like it's such a subversion of like you're expecting Batman to be like, no, you can't do this. For him to say, we can make it look like an accident.
Yeah. For him to be like, no, we can't do this. There are too many witnesses. Be smart we can still do this, but we need to be smart about this. Yeah.
And I did find that narration about Pa's lesson kind of interesting. I will keep this very short because we've talked about it before, but in the original screenplay for Man of Steel, there was a flashback with Clark and Jonathan where they had to put down a wounded animal. And that was meant to set up the killing of Zod later on and to try to draw this connection for the viewer that the killing of Zod was like putting down a wild animal.
I wish that was in there.
I think that would have gone a long way. I don't think it would have solved all the problems that many viewers had, but I think it certainly would have helped. But I just I couldn't help but have that in my mind as Clark was recounting this and sort of thinking about, I mean, it's funny too, though, on the heels of the Loeb Kelly era and especially some of these Joe Kelly stories we spent a lot of time on, like What's So Funny and Ending Battle, where it's this hard line in the sand and it's like, he will not kill under any circumstances ever. But here he doesn't do it, but he gets very close. I do love, though, the way he throws Lex at the end before they leave. Yeah. At least he's rough with him.
Yep. Yeah. He lets him know that he could. If he truly let himself, he could. Lex knows.
Yeah. And we've already mentioned this, but at this point, we've seen Lex injecting himself. We've seen him macking on Amanda Waller, which I really can't make heads or tails of.
Is it just a shock value? Is it because like he's so attracted to power? And she's a powerful woman as well. Is it just like, does he just have the hots for her? I don't know. It definitely was among the biggest surprises of the entire story in a way, right?
By the way, in the movie, Amanda Waller, another DCAU carryover, CCH Pounder, who I know best from The Shield. I love her as the voice of Amanda Waller. Yeah. And I always, I'm looking forward to James Gunn's Superman and all of that, but it's just like this notion that Viola Davis is the only person in the world who can like somehow play Amanda Waller. It's like, no. Like we've had others.
We've had
other
others
people can do it.
Still. Yes, for sure. For sure.
There's one thing I kind of want to just mention from the animated movie, because I thought this was kind of an intriguing angle. That's not part of the comic, but in the movie, Lex similarly is unhinged just as he is in the comic, but it gets to the point where it's like he's welcoming the asteroid. It gets very Thanos-like where it's going.
save who he wants to save and rebuild society in his image in the ashes, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. So that's an angle that's pretty distinct to the, I mean, I don't know. Did that work for you?
Here's the thing. Going back to our previous discussion, we're already assuming he's off his rocker at this point, right? I would buy it less if it was like his plan all along. I buy it more that he's like hopped up on this stuff and like enraged with Superman and being like, you know what? Cool. Let's do it. Let's kill everybody. Because he's already in such a state. I'd buy that more than him being like, no, this is my plan.
You know, I'm working this out in real time. Yeah, I mean, I agree with you about him just being off his rocker. I actually kind of I like that he has a point of view in the movie. Because in the comic, it does sort of beg the question. So, okay, the missiles didn't work. You're not asking Superman for help. And in the comic, Superman has a great line. He's like, why didn't you just ask me for help with this asteroid?
Yeah, right.
But it does sort of beg the question. It's like, well, bro, what is your plan? And Superman says to Lex in the comic, he's like, what were you going to do? Just boom tube out of here? And I guess that is the answer, which is, I don't know. I feel like that's a little weak. Whereas in the movie, yeah, it's totally deranged, but it's like, oh, okay, there's a reason why he's not doing anything more to try to stop this.
That him wanting to like rebuild what's left of the planet in his image tracks more than him just running away in a boom tube, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let me stay on the track of the movie here, because at this point, I'd rather end on a stronger note from the comic. So let me stay on the animated movie here, because we get to Hero, the Japanese toy man, and we get this giant Superman Batman composite robot. A huge departure in the animated movie is that rather than Captain Atom piloting this rocket ship, it's Batman. And on the one hand, I get it. It's a Superman Batman movie. And especially if you're taking away the maybe Metallo killed my parents bit, you gotta juice it for Batman. You gotta give something for Batman here. So you do that. My gripe with this is like, it is insane that he's in this ship and he's able to destroy the asteroid and he's just okay. He's just like in his pod out there.
Yeah. When he flew up there and he saw them just like chilling in the cockpit, looking like just kind of sleepy. I was like, I don't know. Could we not have just set Superman up though, even though it's kryptonite? Would he still not have had like, if what happened isn't strong enough to, we're nitpicking here, of course. If what happened wasn't strong enough to destroy that ship, like even with it being kryptonite, like Superman probably might have been okay, if not also hurt, right? Clearly what was happening they showed was not so devastating that like it wouldn't destroy like a ship, let alone the Man of Steel. So I don't know. I was kind of like, I had the same reaction as you. I was like, okay, I get why they did it, but it's like, yeah, I mean, was it that big of a deal if you just,
I mean, so in the comic, I think Captain Atom talks about how I think the idea is like the ship would almost certainly be destroyed and then Superman would be exposed to all that radiation. And I think in the movie, I don't know that they get that specific, but I think it's still sort of the same general idea that even with the shielding, it still might not be enough. I forget the exact ins and outs of this, but that was my problem with putting Batman in the ship. And here's the thing. If you want to send him up there and make it seem like he's going to be blown to smithereens, but then have this reveal that he's alive, you got to at least give a better reason for how he survived. Some sort of, it can't be like, he's just there.
They already have a base in this story set up for how inventive Bruce is. That's Clark's line. Let him show that inventiveness at the end and have that be full circle, right? He has some type of gadget, plan, something that he was keeping close to the chest that helps him survive that. I would have liked to have seen that more. Yeah.
Yeah. But anyway, jumping back to the comic, although a lot of what we're talking about applies to both, but specifically on the comic book front. Yeah. So the Japanese toy man, Hiro Nakamura, this composite Superman Batman robot, any reactions to those?
Yes. Are you ready for me to start my gripes? So
wait, can I guess? Is it about how he's this hormonal teenager who's objectifying Power Girl? Is that it?
Yes. Winner, toy man dinner. You got it in one. Now, I have no problem with Toyman being young. I thought that's a cool angle for all this being inventive. I like that. You need somebody with the brains. His lines about the IQs and his quips. Sure, I get it. Just like the pushback I'm going to get, I'm sure, is like, well, that's how like a 13-year-old boy like would approach somebody like Power Girl. We're like, sure, fine. Maybe let's not reinforce that. in all those forms of media. And also, like, if I'm being charitable as well here too, the only good that comes from it is like maybe pointing out like that maybe Power Girl needs a new costume. Maybe we're not doing that anymore. So maybe me being charitable, like that's what we can take away from it. But I was like we have this great emotional crux, this engaging storyline, these epic fights and epic battles, and we got boob jokes. I was just kind of like don't bring us back down here, you know?
Fair. Yeah. I mean, I don't know what it says. I wasn't that bothered, but your point is well taken. I mean, I guess the way I look at it, it's like this, as anytime we encounter this sort of stuff, like, right, not to condemn or condone, like just to acknowledge.
Yes.
And I feel like this was 22 years ago. Like, I don't think
As
this
we've
would,
talked about on this show, but recently even with our big Superboy conversation as well, very similar, right? Where, yes, different time. I think we're not excusing it, but through that lens, yes, this is just me with my 2025 goggles on.
No, but your point
looking
is,
at it.
I think that's more than fair. You would not see that today. And I think probably rightfully so. But to your point, I think if there's a particular critique that I think is fair, even through the lens of 2003, it's that given where we are in the story, it's like, do we really want to be going for these cheap laughs? I mean, the stakes are incredibly high. And you also do have the sight gag of the composite Superman Batman robot. That should be enough, I feel.
Yes, I agree.
That's one of those things, man, like, and why this journey is always so fascinating. Because like when I read this as a kid, I didn't know what the hell composite Superman Batman was.
Yeah.
But
why
now,
would you? Right.
You know, now having more experience with the pre-crisis comics, it's like, oh, like that was it's a fun nod to that.
It's a fun callback.
I actually have the Superman Batman pop, the composite Superman Batman pop.
That's awesome.
You know, so something like that now I thought was kind of fun. By the way, because if I don't say this now, I'll forget it later. Merchandise from this storyline and also the animated movie. Do you remember there was a really cool line of DC Direct action figures based on Public Enemies? We had them at alternate realities for freaking years.
Well, I'm gonna have to look this up now.
But very much in the style of Ed McGuinness.
Maybe we can drop some pictures into the Facebook group or something.
Oh yeah,
like
of course.
To kind of show them off, because I'd be interested to kind of take a look at that as well.
I mean, they definitely did Superman, Batman, Metallo. Maybe I think Captain Marvel as well. And there might have been multiple lines as well. But there's at least one line. But yeah, we had them in the comic shop for years. I was always tempted by them, but at that point in time, I was far more of a statue guy. And on that note, when they put out the animated movie, they did statues of Superman and Batman based on the Ed McGuinness art, and I have the two of them. They're packed up in a closet at the moment, but I do have them, and I sold off a lot of my statues years ago. I kept those. I love them.
Nice. Well, I'm glad at least you still have those. You're going to have me on eBay is what you're going to have me doing after this. So I'll let you know what I find.
Yeah, but no, getting back to the final issue of this storyline, you have Captain Atom return and explain that he's had this meeting with future Superman and he needs to help them avoid this mistake. He's going to pilot the ship and he takes off. And I guess we can stay with Captain Atom here for a bit. His story kind of plays out in the bottom panel of a bunch of pages as he's reciting his star log about how he only ever wanted to be a hero and serve his country, and he's tried his best, even as things didn't always go the way he wanted them to, like when he led the Justice League and whatnot. I thought it was a poignant send-off for him. How about you?
Next month, give me Captain Atom #1. Okay? Give me that. I'm buying it. I'm in. I'm reading it. I do. It was a poignant. We learned everything we need to know about Captain Atom, which I love, and how I love most of my heroes, right? Is that he's conflicted, but is ultimately compelled to do the right thing despite the cost to himself. And that's always a story worth telling. They did it wonderfully. I like the idea of like service and orders versus your own personal ethics. And who makes your skin crawl, to throw it back to that line as well too.
Yeah, no, I found that satisfying. And the comic gives him more play because in the movie, similarly, he seemingly sacrifices himself stopping Major Force. But then, refresh my memory. He just pops up again later? What?
I think so.
But here,
I think he does, yeah.
Yeah, I think he just pops up later and he's recovered now. It's like, all right, it was a little anticlimactic. Here, at least, you followed him, and he really had a pretty solid arc. And,
definitely.
As he's kind of reconciling with the loyalty to Superman, loyalty to country. But yeah, I appreciated the sacrifice that he made here as he plunged the robot into the into the asteroid.
It's also like deeply funny in a way too, like this serious, wonderful moment. He's just like in that giant composite robot. It's where else but comics. It can something be so heartfelt and so ridiculous at the same time, and I love that.
Yeah, I know. I think that juxtaposition really there's something very charming about that. And then at the end of the previous issue, we had seen Lex finally don his war suit, which we will learn came from Apocalypse and from Darkseid. But there's this line, if you want someone killed right, you have to do it yourself. And this is, the injecting himself with that cocktail is one thing, but I mean, jumping into the suit and appearing before the public to call out Superman, leading to this confrontation. I mean, this is our grand finish here. Actually, that reminded me, I want to jump back to probably the second issue of the storyline when Lex goes on TV and puts the bounty on Superman's head. And Batman says, like, what do you think Lex is doing? Like, what does he want? And Superman's like, a showdown at last. And Batman's like, well, give it to him. But I think that's, going back to where we started about this shift in Lex. And I really think it is like, he just got to a point where he couldn't take it anymore. And, and he needed to have this final confrontation.
Yeah,
and
he let it all out finally. Yeah, for sure. Whenever he puts that suit on and fights Superman, and this might not be fair, but I also think it also might be. Every time I see him wear that suit against Superman, I'm just like, oh, he's gonna lose. Like, to me, like, that's like his loser suit. Like, I know, like, that sounds meaner. I like when he's in the suit. I'm not taking anything away, but it's like, when I see him in that suit, a part of me's like, you stopped using your greatest weapon, your mind. And you're trying to go toe to toe with Superman. And like, that never goes well, But like, of course, if you're going to have a showdown, he's going to wear that suit. They're going to, they're going to monologue. They're going to threaten each other. And then, he's going to die, wink, nudge, but not really, of course. He's going to be buried, right? It's refresh me. I remember he's like buried underneath the rubble. That's the same for both the comics and the movie?
No, in the movie, he's carted off in an ambulance.
He's carted off, right. I remember in the comics, we actually have a cool thing where he's down there looking crazy and still alive, which I like. I actually like that better than him just being carted away.
Oh, yeah. I think the comic
much more sinister.
Yeah, the comic is much stronger. There will be a reckoning, a crisis.
Yeah,
no,
that's right.
But I mean, like this final battle, I don't know. Maybe I'll argue against myself because in the Superman title, right before Loeb and McGinnis left, there was all this business about Perry and Clark faking Clark's firing from the Daily Planet. And this notion that Clark now is going to work undercover for Perry White to investigate President Lex and finally bring him down. Mm-hmm. And at the end of Public Enemies, Bruce has a line about, it's fitting that Clark got to write the final story about President Lex. So at least there's a little bit of a button on that.
This is nice.
Is there a part of me that would have loved a storyline, a miniseries, an original graphic novel that was all about like hard-boiled investigative reporter Clark Kent taking down the president with his pen? Yeah, that could have been interesting. But
sign me up day one. Yes, sir.
But I think if we're looking at kind of the nature of the medium and the superhero genre in particular, and just kind of the years of buildup to this, I don't know. I think in the end, you kind of needed this. There's something kind of viscerally satisfying about seeing these two guys come to blows. Now, you could have done it in different ways. Did you need the battle suit per se? No. I mean, Superman was getting weakened by the asteroid. That was addressed. Because there's a moment in the comic where he's talking to Power Girl. He's like, hey, are you feeling anything?
Yeah.
Right? So it could have been that, plus the fact that Lex is all juiced up. Like they could have we didn't need the war suit per se. But either way, I do think there's something to be said for having that physical confrontation, for it kind of coming to that in the end.
Why is he like also juiced up when he's in the war suit?
Yeah, I don't know.
I don't know if anybody listening. I'm just like you said, figuring out in real time here. But like, why is like, does him being physically stronger also make him stronger in the suit? I don't know. It's a question that just dawned on me as we're talking about this.
As they're battling, there a lot of these beats we've already talked about. I wake up every morning wanting to strangle you, and why didn't you just ask me for help? And this warning about aligning with Darkseid, like all of that. One of the most interesting bits here is Clark's narration and I talked about this in our President Lex episode, but this is really the moment here where he talks about how, he might have made a mistake, right, in not inserting himself into the election, right? But he says, he's like, what was I going to do? Get on television and tell people not to vote for Lex. Now, the argument that I made in the past is like, yes, but here, as he talks about, to him, to Superman, from his perspective, he even says, like, using his name and reputation to insert himself in that way would have deprived the people of their choice, even if they made the wrong one. And he says Lex Luthor should never have been elected president. End of story. And as he says this, he says that asteroid is never going to reach Earth and your presidency is over, as he clocks him and sends him flying right into Lex Tower.
Yeah. And it's in that moment where you get why, right? There is a physical showdown because you want that catharsis.
Yeah.
I think you can only have from that, with a little physicality ended in there too as an exclamation point.
Yeah. I keep using this word, they're underdogs in the story, but also there is, and as this was the case in so much of the Loeb Kelly era that we talked about, I mean, there's a real humanity here. I mean, there's a point when earlier in the story when they're fighting the villains, and I think he punches Mongol, and he's like, now you're just a thug for Lex Luthor.
Yeah,
and I'm sick of Lex Luthor. Like, he's so, that's the thing, like, he's so effing annoyed with this guy. So
it's great too, because we're seeing them operate in like, not even like a country or a universe even that's like a shade of gray, but like it's even a shade darker than that now, right? And I think that's so interesting as well to see, like, you're getting Clark and Bruce, I'd say more so Clark, to like ask these questions to himself and wrestle these questions that we haven't seen too much, at least at this scale before. And that's so fascinating, right? To see, the fact that he still ultimately lets Americans make their choice, even if he knows in his heart it's the wrong one. I don't know anybody who's that big of a person, but I think I really want that person to be real and to exist. And I think we can all learn from that person, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, look, not too long ago, we went through a very contentious election, and regardless of which side you're on, you probably felt like a substantial portion of the country made an objectively wrong decision, particularly if you were on one side. So, you really can appreciate his frustrations with respect to Lex. And by the way, the backdrop for this is that Lex is gearing up for his re-election bid in this. Look, do I personally feel like Superman would have been depriving the people of a choice if he did an interview with Lois Lane and said, I don't think Lex Luthor would be an effective president? Personally, no, but I can respect that the character of Superman feels otherwise. And I can respect his choice. And I at least like the payoff that we got here.
Yes, I agree. It's not that it's because the decision was up to him. And I think that inner monologue, again, which is why I think enjoy the inner monologue, to our earlier point, right, in this, is we see why he did that. It wasn't because he wanted to necessarily sway people's votes one way or another. It was because he didn't want to take away any inkling of free choice or free will that they had. And that's Superman. That's Clark.
I mean,
I get that. Even if I don't agree with it, I at least can understand, I think, where he's coming from with that.
All right. Look, and I guess this is the lawyerly training. I like looking at both sides, and I like arguing against myself sometimes, especially when it allows me to kind of get through to the other side and enjoy something in a way that I didn't before. Sure. When we talked about this a few episodes ago, the example I used was Dwayne Johnson endorsing Biden in the 2020 election, right? This huge celebrity, hundreds of millions of followers, essentially saying like, this is who I support, right? Yep. And could Superman not have done that? But Dwayne Johnson is no Superman, right? Like, I think that's the aspect of this that I neglected a bit, is that
Dwayne Johnson is a very strong, very big man, but he also doesn't have the powers of a god. And that could be the other thing too. Like, how many people, well, maybe in Clark's mind, he's like, well, what if people know how powerful I am? And they're worried about if they disagree with me, or they, there's a certain otherworldly element with him as well too.
Oh,
what if the whole xenophobia thing comes up again too? That what about the hornet's nest that would start with Lex being like, of course he doesn't want, he's an alien, he's not from here. It's Clark's investigative journalism. He's smart. I'd like to think that even beyond that, he thought about maybe these different angles as well too.
Yeah, no, fair enough. I wasn't even thinking about that angle, but just his stature dwarfs any real world celebrity we can think of. And so,
for sure.
Yeah, his influence does extend in a far greater way than I think any real world example we could think of. So, all right, you know what? I think I've come around on that.
Yeah.
And then we get this confrontation. See, this is the thing. You lose this in the animated movie, but the comic brings everything full circle with the Corbin bit and this confrontation between Batman and Lex. Like, ultimately, Superman and Lex need their showdown, but Batman's got business with Lex too, going all the way back to No Man's Land and then the Bruce Wayne murderer and fugitive storylines. I mean, I don't know how well you remember those.
I remember the broad strokes because it's been a while, but I do, yes, especially No Man's Land. Talk about another, influential piece, and I'm sure a lot of our comic reading history. Yes.
But I mean, murderer and fugitive, long story short, Bruce Wayne is framed for murder, and you find out that Lex was the one who was ultimately pulling the strings in retaliation for Bruce Wayne stopping Lex's play for Gotham City, or at least.
I mean, he did it to both of them, right?
Yes. Right.
Essentially.
And that's the thing. We talked about Lex planting the information, this fake information about Corbin. He doesn't know that Bruce Wayne is Batman, but he just knows what a dedicated detective and crime fighter Batman is. So this open case would plague him. But I love this. He shows up in Lex crash lands into his office and it's empty. And that's when Bruce reveals that Talia sold off everything because she had taken over as CEO. And that was, I thought, such a nice button on that development from the Superman titles that she betrayed him and sold everything off. And Bruce Wayne is the new owner of the building.
Good for her.
Yeah, it's great. And they have, they exchange blows and Lex ends up clinging to the side of the building. And Batman offers to help him up, but no deals, right? He's going to jail. And he'll be the first former president to be sitting in a prison cell. But Lex refuses and he lets go. And as he's falling, we hear a huge boom. And there's this question, did he boom tube away? Like, what's going on? It turns out this is why you don't make deals with Darkseid, because he used the boom tube to take out the lower floors of the Lex Tower building. And so everything collapses. And to your point, at the very end of the story, in the final panel, we'll see Lex kind of crawling around and he says, there will be a reckoning, a crisis.
And that got everybody excited. Just saying the word crisis, right? Come on. I
have a little bit more to say on that, but at this point in the story, I feel like a few more pages might have been helpful because they cover a lot in those headlines.
Yep.
But it's all right.
Yeah, right. I was satisfied with the ending overall. With the ending, I think overall, again, I think you have to keep him lurking. You have to keep him at Lex threatening. It's funny when I think about, Public Enemies, I really just, as much an important part as Lex is, and it's his story as well too. When I think of the ending, I come back to Clark and Bruce. I always still come back to that even more than, Lex threatening a crisis and Lex all that too. To me, that really is just, the central core,
Yeah, no, absolutely. But yeah, in those headlines, one of the things we see, Pete Ross sworn in as president, Justice for Pete.
Oh yeah, there we go. That's our boy, right?
So we'll have that. And then also this meteor shower raining down, and we see not only green kryptonite, but also other shades of kryptonite. So this larger idea that at this point in time, we had a lot more insertions or returns of pre-crisis elements. And I think that's another example. And
that's fun too, because it set things up for the then future as well too, which is fun.
Honestly, for the next arc, because that kicks off with the heroes of the DC Universe rounding up the kryptonite for Superman and all of that. And the bit about Lex in that final panel, there will be a reckoning, a crisis. So I mean, I don't know how well, if at all, you remember Loeb's final arc with A Vengeance.
Not terribly well, if I'm being honest.
That's fine.
Off the top of my head.
So there's a lot of kind of reality jumping and whatnot throughout the story. But what you find out, and this is
That's
actually
got Joker and Lex in it.
Lex does have a part, but it's more kind of what we get to in that storyline here. And like I said, we did a more extensive discussion about this in the past, but this is actually a nice callback to our Emperor Joker episode from not too long ago, because you find out towards the end of With a Vengeance that all of these other different versions of Batman and Superman and their villains that they're encountering, it's all part of this kind of cosmic chess game between Mxyzptlk and Joker. Like Mixie is sharing his power.
Yes.
And
this is ringing a bell. Yes.
They're doing all of this. And there's this great moment. I didn't remember this when we did our Emperor Joker episode, but I'll mention it now because Joker's like, why doesn't anyone remember when I had your powers before, to Mxyzptlk? And he's like, because I don't want them to. Also, they never collected those stories in a trade paperback.
So good.
Which at the time was true. And towards the end of that story, Mixie is putting all of the players, including Lex, back in their proper place. And Mixie has a line about how I'll do a little bit of fixing. And so we the reader see what the original moment was going to be. It was Lex at the end of Public Enemies standing there saying Clark Kent is Superman. And then after Mixie's fixing, it says there will be a reckoning, a crisis.
Yep.
Audience, I welcome your input because I really don't know what to make of that because Manchester Black had erased Lex's knowledge unless the implication, you know what though, actually Bruce has a line at the very end of Public Enemies. I think something about like, who knows what this experience has knocked loose from Lex's mind. So,
oh, sure. Okay.
Maybe this is my reading of it. Maybe the implication is that after the events of Public Enemies, he somehow regained the knowledge about Superman's secret identity, but Mixie erased it.
It's reverse amnesia. He got hit in the head and he remembered things instead of forgetting them.
Is there anything we didn't talk about that you wanted to with this?
I love it. Everybody go read it again and go watch it again. We did, I think, a really thorough due diligence here. I'm really welcoming other people's comments and feedback on all of this as well too. And again, I would challenge everybody with this chestnut here as we wind down. If you have somebody in your life, a loved one, maybe a friend, a cousin, scream it to people on the streets. No, don't do that. Don't actually do that. Who have never really read a comic before, or maybe a lapsed reader, really consider bringing this up to them or maybe showing them this video, because to our early point in this episode, this is such an accessible, interesting, and fun kind of jump off point into Superman, Batman, and the larger DC universe. And accessible doesn't always mean simple, nor does simple always mean bad. And I think that's something we all need to remember. And it's just a wonderful story. And hopefully listening to me and Anthony here today for, this amount of time talking about it, it's become clear how many times in this story that we've gotten excited and we've cheered despite having read it before and all of that stuff as well too. So I'm willing to bet a lot of people will feel the same way.
Well said. Yeah, man, like this was so much fun to revisit, to reread, to rewatch, to have this conversation. Like I said, we talked about it in our earlier Superman Batman episode years ago, but I wanted to circle back to it and spend the time on it. And it's one of those things where there's the personal connection to it, going back to that time when I first experienced it. And I can't discount that, but even being as objective as I can be, I feel like it holds up. I feel like it doesn't feel like it's 22 years old. And with the exception of maybe the Power Girl bit and the Superman and some of the members of the Superman and Batman families, there really is, I feel like, a very timeless quality to it. It's a ton of fun. Yeah, seriously, if anyone hasn't read it, give it a read. It's 6 issues, and I think that the time is really well spent. A lot of meat on the bone here. It was a ton of fun. What would you like to mention to folks? Anywhere you'd like to direct them?
So you guys can feel free to follow me at j.remy on Blue Sky, ye old Blue Sky, if you want to check that out as well too. As Anthony mentions at the top of our show now, I also do a video game podcast called Cartridges with Care. If anybody has a video game they want a platform to talk about, I want to hear about the stuff you love. That's what we do on this show. That's what I do on Cartridges with Care. And as always, I'm looking forward to the comments and the feedback. Again, I always like to shout out the community that you have here, Anthony. Everybody's interactions and comments are always so interesting, and I always look forward to checking the Facebook group. If you're not in the Facebook group and you're listening to this, go on and jump on in. Some really great people and some really cool conversations happening in there.
Yeah, absolutely. You can check out the link in the show notes. And speaking of our wonderful audience, we have a ton of audience comments and questions that we're going to be going through next week in our milestone 200th episode.
200 episodes, Anthony. Congratulations, my friend. That's amazing.
Thank you. Thank you so much for being part of this and all of the other episodes that you've done and will do down the line. Audience, thank you so much for tuning in. Make sure you come back next week for our 200th. It's going to be a really special installment. Until then, as always, it's about what you do. It's about action. Support the podcast and receive exclusive content, including bonus episodes, by becoming a member at patreon.com/Anthony Desiato. Flat Squirrel Podcasts is home to Digging for Kryptonite and another exciting episode in the adventures of Superman. Please subscribe, rate, and review today, and continue the conversation by joining us on social media. Links are in the show notes. Thank you all